right, welcome back to Less Lethal Contingencies. Alan here. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start tearing down a friend of mine's IntruBuster Gen 2 by Mercury Rise. We're going to tear it down and we're going to take the clamshell off of it. I already took the bolt assembly out. I have other videos on how to do that. So to shorten this up a little bit, I already did that. I'm going to proceed to take the clamshell out and take the inner assembly of the marker out of the clamshell. Okay. I also have videos on that as well. So what we're going to do here is we'll go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll pick it up from there in hopes of keeping this video a little shorter. But the goal in this video is going to be to look at the Sear and trigger assembly and see if we can't figure out why this gun has a hair trigger, meaning the trigger is super light on it. If you're not careful, you can shoot 2 rounds back to back. Also, it seems to auto fire very frequently. And I suspect, I've tried different bolt springs. I don't believe it to be the bolt spring. Even under CO2 conditions, it's doing that. It's causing an intermittent auto fire. Airing it up on high pressure air through the back, just airing it up. Sometimes it's dry firing, auto dry firing. So I'm really thinking it's something to do with either a weak Sear spring or something that ain't quite lined up right in there. The Sear seems to be, when I compare it to my own IntruBuster Gen 2, the Sear in the back, when you pull the bolt and valve out and you can see the little Sear in there, it seems like on this marker it's not sitting as high as it does on mine. I don't know if we can see that or not in here. Okay. So you can see the Sear right there. That's supposed to grab the bolt, right? Each time after it fires, it's supposed to come back, and that Sear should lock up the bolt again until you pull the trigger again. All right. I think it feels real soft when I compare it to the proper operation of the Sear in my own IntruBuster Gen 2. So I'm thinking either the spring. Now, my buddy here, whose marker this is, he had, I don't know if this is when the problem started or not, or if it's been there the whole time since new, but I suspect this problem started after he had a round jammed. He was shooting shaped ammunition out of this gun. He jammed a round, and during the process of trying to free up the jam, he had shoved something down the barrel and he dislodged the spring stop. Okay. Of course, now he had to take it all apart to put the spring stop back in, so he was pushing on that Sear spring. And I wonder, or I suspect, maybe that spring may have possibly came out of shape or got stretched a little. At least I'm hoping that's all it is, and it's something that I correct. Okay, so like I said, high level, that's what we're doing here. I am going to pause the video now, and I will go ahead and undo all these screws in hopes of lessening how long this video is. So I'll be back in a moment after I take this clamshell off. All right, we're back. So we have the inner chassis removed out of the clamshell, right? Took the 2 detents out. Okay, this way they don't fall out and lose them. All right, so these are metal detents. Put them aside for safekeeping. You don't want to lose those. They do go one on either side. Typically, I'll put them back with a little glob of silicone grease just to keep them in there. There's a spring on either side of the clamshell that actually implies inward pressure on the little detents. Okay, and that detent is just to keep your round in place. When they start getting worn out, your rounds may slip through the barrel. They may slip by the detents and run down out of the barrel. I have either a worn spring, I suspect, on my IntruBuster Gen 2, because it periodically likes to push out rounds through there. Yeah, so we have the only thing left in here is the Sear assembly in here, and the spring stop is in here. We'll just leave that in there. I looked at it briefly. Nothing looks out of place. It's in there, so it looks like it was reinstalled properly. I can see the little O-ring, which is more of a buffer than anything else. Doesn't seal anything, but I can see there's an O-ring on the spring stop. So all that looks fine. And like I was saying, slides around just fine in there. The Sear itself it looks to be a little lower in position in there than where mine, right? Right, so right here you can see the Sear pops up in there. I think you can see if I'm turning this, doing any justice right in there. Okay. Right here, where the Sear is supposed to catch the bolt. This one seems to be sitting lower than the one in my gun is, and it feels like you can push it down very easily. So I think something's not lined up right in there, or maybe the spring. I don't know. So I'm gonna have to pull this apart here. At least I'm thinking that's my best guess. Like I said, I tried bolt springs and nothing, it doesn't look to be like a bad bolt spring. And the symptom I was having on this, or that my friend was having, was that even under CO2 conditions, mostly with a power mod on the back or a rear ASA plugged, you'd get auto fire. Under HPA, oh my goodness, it's even massive auto fire problem. And very, very touchy, even just on CO2. Very, very, like what I would call a hair trigger, very touchy. So I'm thinking something in the Sear is not right. Hoping it's something that I can easily correct here, because I'm not sure who sells parts for that. I mean, it's a relatively inexpensive marker, so for that matter, I mean, it's the same setup as the Pastelli X68. It looks to be the same. May even use similar parts, but even for the X68, I'm not sure who sells. If I needed a new Sear spring, I'd probably have to pull the spring off, measure it, and see if I could source one. Anyways, so this assembly seems to be, you have this spring here, which is what holds the little trigger bar on from the trigger assembly onto the where the what operates the Sear there. I forget what they call that, but this spring is all that kind of holds upward pressure on that trigger bar, right? So normally it would be like this. I mean, that spring looks fine, and you'd be getting different symptoms if that spring wasn't on there. But essentially, this is how it would be. You need that spring applying a light upward pressure. Same thing with the BP50 setup. This is like looks like a BP50 on steroids. Very similar looking setup here, if not identical, just larger. So that spring needs to be in good condition. You want to be careful that you don't remove it. You don't need to remove it. You can see it's kind of captured by this pressed in pin over here. You can see it's got a hook, and then it kind of hooks and that stops, and then it's captured by this. So we can just pull this up out of the way and leave it alone. We're not going to remove that. These two Allen head screws will need to come loose, and then we'll have to carefully pull this stuff out. There's a cover here, And then we'll take a look at, this is basically how it operates, right? The trigger, you pull the trigger bar pulls on this, and then it pushes up on there, which is some kind of a valve, they call it. And then it allows operation of the sear in here. So I need to get that out of there. I think that's a 2mm. Let's try that out again. Let's see if it's 2mm. Yes, it is. They're very short screws. Okay. Not a lot to them. Don't lose them, because who knows if you'll be able to source them if you needed them. See, are they metallic? Well, the spring is. Not sure if that's metallic or not. Magnetic. It's an aluminum body, so let's see. Yeah. Okay. So we don't want to lose those. Okay. Let's take this screw off next. 2mm Allen key for this. Okay. Doesn't look like anything's under any kind of spring tension. All right. Now, what comes out first? I've never had one of these apart before. Not sure. Kind of looks like this needs to come out first. I don't know if it's spring loaded or not. I'm thinking that just sits in there. Yeah. Okay. So that's got, I'll wipe it off. So this piece right here, you got that little, right, that little notch there just sits right inside here. Okay. This sits under the, I think that's this, I think that might be part of that valve. Yeah, so that's how it's sitting like that, right? There's your screw hole. I think, I don't know if this is, all right, it is magnetic. So that's it. So it sits in there like that. So I'm going to put this just the way it sits, right? So that sits in there. Just like that. So when the trigger bar pulls on it, this pulls up on there like that. Okay, so that's that. That's how that operates. Okay, that looks pretty straightforward. Now this piece here, let's see if I can clean up some of this, sop some of this up. Don't want to bend my spring, my trigger bar spring. This here looks like this plate is connected to this pin and that pin inside, right? This pin, which the spring sear is also around, and the other end of the spring sear is looks like it's wrapped around the other pin, but these two pins hold this cover captive. So I'm just going to rock it back and forth. Take a look at it. I don't want to lose anything. Okay, I don't know if anything else is preloaded under here. Doesn't look like it. Check to see if any of this stuff is broken or anything. All right, so that cover looks pretty straightforward. It goes on this pin and these two little pins here. Okay. So it's like that, and it slides over those pins and locks this all in together. Okay. So we have these components. Now, what can we see in here? One, let me check these pins and make sure they're pushed down. That one was a little loose. This piece here has a spring in it. I think this is your Sear pivot, if I'm not mistaken, this one here. This part, let me see. Tweezers, maybe. This part's got a spring in it, so you got to be careful pulling this out for sure. Well, that's spring loaded too. Okay. So this looks like pretty much identical to the Pistelli X68, and I would imagine the BP50. Okay. I forget what Sean was calling this when he did it on the teardown of the X68. I think he said it was a power valve or something. I'll have to play back that video. But it looks to be the same. You got this spring here, which just sits in here. And it goes back in like that, and this whole unit just sits in there. And then this piece is spring loaded as well. Okay, you can push on that, spring loaded. Doesn't look like that's gonna come apart. It looks like it's got a maybe an Allen key screw inside there that's holding that assembly together. Okay, so that was just like that. All right, goes that way. Now, what else is in there? Anything? Let me get a Q-tip so I can get some of that grease out of there. Got a couple Q-tips. We're getting fancy now with Q-tips. These come in handy. All right, all right, now that we got that out of there, what is it doing? Well, it's been moving around a lot. You can see some wear in the aluminum right there. So the silicone grease I packed in there, I went crazy with it because I put that shit on everything. Silicone grease. Good stuff. Just kind of want to wipe off a bunch of it first so that I can see what I'm moving before I move it. All right, so see nothing in there. So this little puppy just sits in there. I guess when you put it back in, you just put it back in like that. It just kind of sits in there. Just want to be careful you don't lose that spring if it comes popping out. So that's it. Not really seeing. This is the piece that goes up and down, so when this goes up, it must lever, you know, when the trigger rod moves it, this piece goes up, right? And then that must catch the end of the sear here, which course pivots the sear that's inside there down and out of the way. So it's kind of elaborate. You think there could have been a simpler way to do all that, but if it works, great. So I feel like I know how to put that back in there. Now, what I want to do is take the sear out because I want to check it for damage. First thing is I think this is the pivot pin for the sear. There we go. Took the spring off easy enough. Now the spring should be connected and captive on the sear itself. Okay. So I took it off of this pin, which is how you're going to put it back on. It has to go back on that pin there. Okay. So what that spring's supposed to be doing, if it ain't one weak, is it should be holding the sear up so it's engaging into the bolt. Okay. See, there, it's back on, right? Now, if I take my finger inside and try to push down on the sear, so I can work it, I get these things out of the way. Put my elbows down. Okay. So now I'm going to push in, right, on the sear. The part that captures it locks into the bolt. I want to operate it down and see that's pushing against. I mean, I feel some tension. I just feel like, you know, it's like it should be over more. Seems like that should be popping up more and capturing. So, I don't know. I'm going to take it apart and see if I can see any abnormal wear on anything. All right, that's what I'm going to do. I don't even know if this pivot's working right. There's your pivot pin. Okay. I'm going to pull it apart and clean it all up. I'll pause the video there, clean it all up, and then we'll restart the video when I put it back together. I think was what we're going to do. But let's pull the rest of the parts out. There's your pivot pin. Here's the Sear. Two pins are still in here. They can come out. They lift out. Nothing looks bent on that one. I'll put it back in there. Okay, so there's you got a little wear. I don't think it's excessive, but I mean, there is some wear on that Sear. That's the part that would be engaging the bolt, right? The groove that's in the bolt to lock the bolt up, back up after you shoot, or for that matter, when you air it up, locks it, holds it there, right? I wonder if the thing just wasn't pivoting right or something. I don't know. But we're going to clean it all up anyways if I don't see anything obvious. Here's the spring. I mean, does the spring look bent? I mean, it does kind of look a little bent, doesn't it? Maybe I can carefully bend that straight. Maybe that's what was throwing it off. Now, like I said, I know my friend had to go in there and push in on that spring so that he could reinstall the spring stop. So, I mean, it does look to me a little bent, right? Maybe what I can do is just, I mean, it is bent, yeah. Would that make the difference, though? Would that make enough of a difference being bent like that? Probably. Not having enough tension on the Sear and causing a hair trigger and under CO2, but yet a worse condition. Yeah. You know what? The more I look at this, the more I'm saying to myself, it's bent there. Now I could try to tighten it back up. Okay, that's one option. Another option might be flip the spring around because it looks like it's the same on either side. Neither one looks any longer, so just like we have on the Pastelli, it looks like it's the same. I could turn the spring around and put the slightly bent one on the pin just to hold it. I may do that even after I try to straighten this out. Yeah. I think that's probably the whole problem here. I really do. And if not, then we need to order a new spring. Because the Sear's got some wear on it, but I wouldn't say it's worn down enough where it's slipping like what you see in a firearm, right? You know, if I get a real worn out Sear, you'll get 2 round bursts and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking that's the case. That's the case. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to straighten out that spring the best I can. Because I don't think I could get one locally. I don't know. I don't know if a hardware store would carry something like this. It looks like a basic spring. Now, the spring is positioned differently in the sense that one's hooks that way and one hooks the other way. So could I flip it and use it? Maybe. I could try that. I'm going to see if I can straighten it out anyways. All right, so I'm going to pause the video, clean this all up, see if I can straighten that spring out, and then I'll be back after that, guys. After these messages, brought to you by Mercury Rise. Yeah. All right, so I got it all cleaned up, and I was able to carefully bend this back using these tweezers. So I think I got it bent back in position where it should be. However, it looks like the spring can be actually rotated and used in either direction. So what I'll do is put the part that wasn't bent, I'll be sure to put that over the Sear, and the part that I bent back we'll put over the holding pin. Okay. But it looks much better than it did. I will say that. Okay. And you can rotate, turn the spin. The spring can be mounted either way. But that spring was definitely bent. So pushing in on it with screwdriver or whatever it was, must have just, the act of pushing down on it bent the spring. And I think that caused the issue. No doubt the spring was bent. I think that showed up in the video. Hopefully it showed up in the video okay. I think we're going to be all right with this. If not, it needs a Sear spring. But I think we'll be all right with it. This one's... So I'll put this side on the Sear. I think that was the side that wasn't bent. It's hard to tell now. I did such a good job of bending it back into position. Yeah. I think this was the side that was good all along. So we'll do that. However, before I put this back together, I want to show you, with the Sear out, I want to show you how that spring stop comes out. Take advantage of that. I don't know if it makes a difference which way I hoop that through or not. I don't think it does, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so I took the all the pins out, right? So now everything's out of here. I cleaned out the grease. There's a cavity the Sear goes up into, right up in here, okay? The two small pins that go here, here, and here, okay? Then the thicker one is over here is the pivot pin. No brainer for that. It goes in one way, it doesn't matter. Either way you can put it in. Same thing with these two smaller pins. These two smaller metal pins, they're the same size, so they are interchangeable. Okay, they just push in either side. So no problem with mixing them up there. Get them unstuck from my magnet. But with all this disconnected, I'm gonna then there is your spring stop. While I'm at it, let me check it, make sure it looks good. Looks like a pretty heavy duty piece. Okay, this is a 19 is what I'm told. This O-ring that's on here, okay? It doesn't provide any sealing, any pressure sealing or anything. It acts more like just like a bumper or something, just so that if there was to be any movement back and forth, I guess you wouldn't have metal on metal. However, the tension of the spring under operating conditions kind of holds that in place anyways, but it's really not so much for sealing of anything. Okay, this is what they call the spring stop, or maybe some people might call it spring rest, or and that just sits in there inside the gun. Okay, this way the spring's got something to sit against. All right, and then she goes right through like that. Oof. Okay. That's the factory 60mm long spring, and that's how it works. It just compresses that way. Okay, so you got to have that in there. That is normally captive by the Sear, if the Sear was together. However, it is possible if you're shoving one of those cleaning wands down there or anything else down the front of the barrel, if the spring and the bolt assembly and valve assembly is out of the gun and you shove something in there, guess what's going to happen? You could catch that, and you could physically force it by the Sear and going in that direction. And if you do, you're not going to get this back in without using that little trick, pulling the gun apart. So don't be that guy, okay? If you got the bolt and valve assembly out of here, definitely don't be shoving a cleaning wand down your barrel. These barrels unscrew. So, I mean, just unscrew the barrel, clean the barrel out however you want, screw it back in. Don't be shoving anything in that direction. Now, in the case of my buddy here, he did it because he was trying to get a stuck shaped round out of the breech here, okay? And that's kind of when he had the problem. He must have took everything out of the back and then went through the front and popped this out past the Sear, and then uh-oh, right? Now we're in an uh-oh moment. Now what do we do? Okay. And then I remember he called me that night. So on how to get it back in there, and he was able to get it back in there, did a good job there, but there's always a risk, and it's not necessarily anything he did wrong, but using that little trick that a lot of guys have used, pushing down on the Sear, the spring, you do, as you can tell, you risk bending that Sear spring, and I think that's all that happened here. Once the Sear spring was bent enough, I think it was causing the trigger to be way too touchy. Okay, got that back in there. We don't want to forget that. All right, we got that animal back in there. So that's pretty much it. So I think this repair should last. I mean, we'll know right away, especially under HBA, but we'll know right away if it works or not. So let's put the pins back in. We'll reassemble it. I'll throw a little bit of silicone grease in there. All right, let me do this with tweezers. This way you guys maybe can see what we're doing. Okay, so again, these two pins, same length, same diameter. Just push them in there. Okay, then you have your pivot pin for the Sear. That just sits in there kind of loose. I guess it just allows some pivoting to take place. And I might actually have to put that in after. Yeah, probably will have to put that in after. So let's see. Let's put the Sear through first. Okay, you can see the wand spot of the Sear. If it wasn't otherwise obvious, the Sear has to go in this way. Okay, just sits up. Whoa, it does. It falls right in there too. If you don't have that pivot pin in there, there's nothing to hold it. All right, now we're going to put our pivot pin in. Get it positioned. Hopefully you guys can see that. There we go. Now the pivot pin's in there, so it should be able to pivot. Hence the word pivot pin. All right. Now I'm going to take these tweezers, and if you don't have these, something like this is really kind of handy, especially when you're dealing with these little springs. All right, so I'm going to keep my thumb on that pivot pin so it don't come flying out of there. And I'm going to see if I can get this spring over this pin right here. Ooh. Thank goodness nothing went flying. Okay. Or didn't stab myself in the eye, because these are pretty sharp. All right. So that is not the easiest thing to do. There we go. Okay. Sure the pins are... That one there just holds the cover assembly, I guess. Okay. All right, that looks okay to me. Now, sure. Yeah, it's in there. All right, so the next piece is this here. Again, I can't remember what this was called. Call it some kind of a valve assembly. Make sure that spring's in there fully. Okay, it looks like it does move around under the tension of that spring, but it'll find its happy spot once you get the cover in place and you have this piece in place as well. So don't panic if it looks like it's moving around. Just try to push it into the spot where it needs to be, but it'll get lined up anyways. Okay. All right, all these pins are down. The spring that I bent back into shape is in place. As far as I know, that's going to work. I hope so anyways. Okay, so that's how it should look there. The next piece is the cover, right? Putting it back the way it came. So the cover's got 3 holes, one for the pivot pin, the bigger one, and 2 for the small 2 pins, one of which your Sear spring is connected to. Okay, so that's going to hold all that in place. And just need to get this snapped into place. There. Now that wasn't too darn bad at all. Okay, and there we have it. All right, spring's attached. Hopefully this resolves our issue. I think it will. I mean, that's the only thing I could find wrong with it was that spring looked really bent. So I think that was what it was. And then this piece, you got that pin right there, right? If I remember correctly, this sat under here. And it kind of has to, if you think about it, because it's a lever system, right? So when that trigger bar, you pull the trigger bar goes forward, which in turn moves this piece, and of course I probably should put the screws in first before I show you all that. But it then moves this piece this direction, which in turn, when this moves that way, it pivots and this arm pushes this up, which then engages the front part of the Sear, pushes against the Sear spring, and allows the bolt to shoot, right? To fly forward under air pressure. Okay. And of course, it does that and compresses the bolt spring, which is the mechanical means that returns the bolt after the air is gone and before the chamber reloads with air within milliseconds, right? That all happens in milliseconds. Many hundreds of milliseconds would be my guess. All right, so we got to put these screws back. Don't want to forget the screws. Don't want to lose these screws. So where is my, here it is. Oop. The purpose of these little Allen 2mm Allen screws is just to hold down this. Well, this one here holds down this side of the cover, right? There wasn't any Loctite on them, so I'm not going to Loctite them. Doesn't seem to be something that's going to vibrate loose. And then the other side kind of holds down your pivot arm. That's what I'm going to call a pivot arm. Come on. Let's put you on there first. Come on, you little bugger. Play nice with me. Play nice. There we go. All right, and the other one kind of just holds down this, what I'm calling a pivot arm. Okay, don't need to crank them down like gorilla strength. All right, so now you have that reinstalled. Okay, that screw holding the pivot arm so it can't pop out of there. And then this screw is holding the cover for the Sear assembly. Okay, now, like I was saying, if you imagine this, the trigger, you pull the trigger, it really, by the act of pulling the trigger, is making this bar go forward, right? That bar goes forward, it pulls on this pivot point here, which in turn pushes up on there, which moves the Sear. Now, it doesn't really move the Sear yet. This stuff works under pressure. Okay, so that's basically, pretty sure that's how all it does there. Okay, now, interesting enough, the Sear doesn't, at this point, doesn't look like it's any higher than my other one, but maybe once the gun's charged once, it'll find its happy spot on that pivot pin, because there is space for that Sear to pivot and move around, and it probably does do all that under pressure when there's, you know, the rest of the assembly's in place. So would be my guess, but that's it right there. Okay, then this little spring, you don't forget that when you start reassembling it. But that's as far as I'm going to take it for here. I will reassemble the rest of it. Reassembly is the opposite of disassembly, so I'm going to try to keep this video short. I just kind of wanted to go over the inner workings of this Sear because I needed to pull it apart anyways for my buddy here to find out what was going on. And I found a bent Sear spring. So I bent it back into shape. I'm hoping it's gonna last. If it doesn't, Barry, then you know what you need. You need a Sear spring, okay? And hopefully this video will be helpful for you to be able to use to do a tear down and replace the spring if you end up going that route. But I'm really hoping that this bending that spring back into shape will give you some mileage out of it, and hopefully it'll operate better. Okay, so I am going to fast forward or pause this, put it all back together, and then we'll close out the video really quick. All right, so we have it back together. I used some silicone grease liberally to a little bit to hold the metal detents in place on either side so they didn't fall out. Okay, so that's seated back in there with the other detent. I put the trigger bar back on. Okay, so the trigger bar is on. You'll notice that this little spring, very important, same thing with the BP50, Now you don't have this issue with the Pastelli because the Pastelli's got a different type of trigger assembly that you don't really take apart at all. Okay, it has the bar, but the trigger assemblies, well, actually, you still do have this spring, don't you? Forget what I just said. I apparently don't know what I'm talking about. I forgot all about it. You do have this little spring that holds that there. But it is a different trigger assembly. But you still have the trigger bar that goes across. Matter of fact, you have to hold it so it doesn't pop out when you go to put the bottom half, the plastic half of the gun back up into the on the X68. So, but anyways, so you do still have this, but this is almost a completely identical assembly with the BP50 by Beeman. It's just the Beeman's smaller. But again, this spring's very important. Okay, that spring, all it does is it holds upward pressure on this trigger bar. Without it, the trigger bar won't stay in position. Okay. So, and you need it to stay in position for it to move all these components, right? See, I already fell off of there. Didn't fall off of here, but it fell off the actual trigger assembly. All right. Stay on there now. There we go. Yeah, and then there's another funny spring too. Just behind here in this trigger, if the trigger ever comes off on you, there's a spring back here, and it has to just grab the front of the plastic over here to provide tension. If you don't have that tension, your trigger won't work right. Well, it won't work, it'll flop around and everything. When you first take the clamshell off, this is the first part that feels spring-loaded. Always carefully push your finger as you're lifting it off. Just push back down on this assembly so it doesn't go flying. If you do that, then that spring won't ever come off. Okay, as long as you don't bang it and rough it up. All right, so this is pretty much it, guys. That spring needs to make sure that spring's there. Make sure this is all pushed down. That's all there is to it. Put the other half of the... Now, the next tricky thing, actually, is one, don't forget your front sight. It's a lousy design, but it just sits, literally just sits in here. I usually forget it, so don't forget to put that back in there. And if it doesn't want to stay, you might have to throw a little grease on it to kind of keep it there. But just, you got to kind of let it balance there until you get the clamshell on. This part here, and be careful you don't lose that little spring. This is your mag release. Ooh, and see what I mean? Gotta be careful you don't lose it. One day that went shooting across the room on me. I was freaking, but I got lucky because I have a desk over off the camera to the right here, and it just fell on that desk. So this piece has to go in here. Okay. And this is the other tricky piece that can be a pain in the butt. Some guys use the magazine to hold it in place. I guess you could do that. I don't always have luck with that. What I usually do is just have an old handle to an old small paintbrush or a chopstick or whatever handy. And I'll run this in there and hold it, to use it just like that, to hold this straight up in place while I put the cover down on it, which we're going to do next. So two things we got to make sure stay in place. This front sight, if you choose to even put it back in the gun, which if you don't, you'll have a little hole there. So that needs to be in place. The rear sight, I took off earlier, slid it out after I loosened up this little Allen key. Okay, so got to keep an eye on that. And I got to line up the mag release. Make sure that spring's in there. Yeah. I guess that's as far down as it goes, that spring. All right, so we're going to line these up. This spring for the detent, make sure your detents are in there too. Make sure that nothing's moved around here, okay? And we're going to start, I think we're going to start by, because I'm going to have to manipulate that mag release anyway, so we're going to start by making sure that that front blade, that front sight goes in there. This is the tricky part. Now, if this doesn't line up perfectly, that's where that's going to come into play. See, I actually made it look easy, huh? Okay, I think I did make it look easy. Son of a gun. All right, so the front sight's captured now in there. Lousy design. I don't know why they did it that way. Would have been better if they just had one like the Beeman where you just knock it back and forth, slide out like this, like the rear one. But, you know, I guess when they design these things, engineers don't think you're ever going to have to pull them apart to service anything. So, and I totally made that look easy. But basically, that's all there is to it. That's usually the next hottest part. So, all right, she's back together. I just have to put my bolt, valve, and spring assembly back together in here. And then I can test fire her later. See if that doesn't resolve the touchy trigger. Now's a good point before I tighten all my screws up, kind of hold the thing together. Just make sure that the trigger should have tension like that. If that trigger bar fell off, there would be no tension on this trigger. Well, I shouldn't say that because there is that little spring. But if that spring wasn't on there or the trigger bar fell off, you know, it would sound different for sure. And you wouldn't have as much tension, you know, pressure, because you wouldn't be operating the whole mechanism. So just make sure it feels good. Okay. And then put it back down carefully. Now keep in mind until you start a couple screws, and I would probably start the two over here near the trigger well, because this is the only part that's kind of somewhat spring loaded, where it could start to lift the clamshell if you would just put it down like this and not, you know, not set a couple screws a little bit and just walk away. So maybe a good idea to at least tighten this one before you go walk away to wash your hands or anything, you know, which I'm going to probably do before I finish screwing this in, because this grease on my hands. I'd at least put 2 springs in here, 2 screws, I mean. All right, don't want to over tighten these. Just snug them all up first and then go around them a second or third time. And, you know, they're easy to strip out. Matter of fact, these screws, they already been used a couple times, so they already feel a little iffy. Matter of fact, one of the screws was missing down here. There was no screw. And I don't have a spare screw, I don't think, unless I can rob one out of one of my Beemans. I mean, I guess I'll try that. But yeah, and just finish screwing it all around, and then you guys know how to put the rear assembly back in, the bolt, valve, spring, and then the end cap. 4mm hex key for the end cap, and then boom, you're good to go. So hopefully this straightening out that Sear spring resolves the touchy trigger. I think it will. And also resolves the weird auto fires that we were getting out of this thing. So if not, I guess we'll be buying a new Sear spring, but I think hopefully it'll hold up. Anyways, thanks for watching. Peace out.